Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Thank you for downloading the Why Factor from the BBC, the programme that asks why we do the things we do. I'm now halfway, running along a beautiful ridgeline looking down into a green valley. I'm in that happy place. I've passed 5 people who have already asked me, why am I doing what I'm doing? Good question. There are many reasons, of course, but at the moment, I'm now feeling the rhythm of my run, my heartbeat, shoes on the trail. I'm in the groove, and it's almost easier to keep on running rather than stop. I'm one of a growing number of people taking part in extreme challenges. I like to run long distances, the longest being 350 miles non-stop across the Arctic Circle. For others, it's scaling Everest or cycling around the world. But why are more people than ever embarking on these feats of physical effort which involve pain, often injury, and an awful lot of time? Just what is the attraction? For the World Service, I'm Lowry Morgan, and this is the Why Factor. The next stop is in the Himalayas in Nepal.
I'm pretty much at Pikey's Peak now, probably a couple of 100 metres off. I'm trying to keep my place. I'm trying to go for it, and I can hear them behind me down the hill, mountain. It's hard, I'm breathing heavy, but I'm getting through it. I can see the next checkpoint, I'm going for it.
Tim Gardner is suffering as he runs at altitude. He's taking part in the Everest Trail Race, running over 100 miles in 6 days and climbing more than 14,000 metres along rocky trails in the shadow of the world's tallest mountain. Once he's got his breath back, he tells us how he's done.
Just come in, that was tough. That was tough. I've never been 4,000 metres like that. Busting a gut to get to the top. I can still feel the air. I've come in first Brit again. I don't know how I've done that, but it was quite emotional again, just because I just feel like I'm doing better than what I thought I could do.
So why does this 34-year-old tree surgeon from the UK push himself to do what he does? We'll find out later. I've made endurance challenges my life. Like many others, I spend most of my time seeking out these adventures, and I'm not the only one. Somewhere along the way, marathons became commonplace, and a whole new breed of extreme events came along. The double, triple, or even decker Ironman, sailing thousands of miles alone, multi-day adventure races, activities that defy description, and some, including me, turned to ultra-running. Long-distance races of any length beyond a marathon, often 100 miles and up to 3,000 miles and more. And the question I'm often asked is, why do it in the first place? And always come back for more.
The most important factor is the sense of achievement that completing a very, very challenging task generates.
Dr. Greg Roebuck from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, has researched the characteristics and effects of ultrarunning.
Another, I think, related motivation is that of self-discovery. Runners talk about wanting to test or explore the limits of what is psychologically and physiologically possible for them. They want to know, can I run 100 miles? Can I run 200 miles? We do know that there is some evidence that they are higher in a trait called sensation seeking, which is all about seeking out novel experiences. And it might be that that's, at least in part, driving this desire to test limits.
Okay, Lows, today's session, we're going to tackle the Fan Dance, which is a Special Forces criteria march. There's a lot of climbing involved today.
My challenge today is a training run along a rugged mountain range near to where I live, the Brecon Beacons in South Wales.
It's a route of punishing climbs and is used for the fitness and navigation phase of the selection process for the UK's Special Forces.
You ready?
No. But I'm nervous and I am looking forward to doing it. It's a box that I've been waiting to tick for a long time.
I think it's enough chit-chat now, Lows. We're going to go straight up Pen y Fan. Let's get this done. Let's go.
Running is the simplest of sports. Just put one foot in front of another. But there's a point in every race, challenge or adventure where we've nothing left, but somehow we find something deep inside ourselves to keep going. And after a while, exploring our limits stops being scary and becomes fun. We begin to revel in the challenge of pushing ourselves further and further.
Right, good morning. This is day 2 of Hell of the Hill. I hope all those who did run yesterday, the legs are feeling up to it. You know the script.
150 miles away from the Brecon Beacons, on a cold and windswept field in the north of England, a group of more than 20 runners are about to test their limits too.
Right, have a great run everybody. We'll see you later on this afternoon. We'll do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and away you go. Well done everybody. Have a fantastic run.
Hell of a Hill is 5 marathons in 5 days, running up and around the 1,000-foot-tall hill called Rivington Pike 25 times and climbing over 20,000 feet. Even though it's the second day, the athletes are in good spirits.
26.2 miles every day up and down hills. So, yeah, all 5 days, don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm here and I've done 1 day, so I've got 4 more. I'm aching a lot. My friends all think I'm crazy and my family are always like, oh, like dead concerned for me, but they all just think that I'm a bit mad, but in a nice way.
I like to challenge myself, and when you see people out on the course, they say, oh, well done, well done. Are you doing all 5? And you get the impression they'll be disappointed if you say, no, I'm just doing the 1 day. So it does feel like you've got to find the hardest stuff to challenge yourself. You have to be a bit different to do this.
The challenge I'm doing is setting several world records. Mainly, there's most marathons in a year. I've currently got that on 270 in 365 days. Those are all official events. Also, at the same time, I'm doing most ultras in a year, which is 50k. That's currently at 176, and I'm looking to be at 200 by March, if I'm still alive.
He may be joking, but Nick Nicholson, a 49-year-old American, is trying to achieve an extraordinary feat. There's something reassuring about striving towards such fixed goals, measuring your progress in numbers. Yet really, as Nick admits, as soon as one goal is achieved, another target is thrown out almost instantly.
I've never really celebrated any of my goals so far. I'm on something like 720 lifetime marathons, and I've never really celebrated any of those achievements because I've always had bigger things. My big and ultimate goal, I think, is doing 1,000 in 4 years. So I think hopefully there will be a big bash or something once I do this 1,000 in 4 years, and then I can look forward to some retirement. Well, I started the running sort of in excess just after my divorce to fill my time. And I think that's where the dark, strange places started. So, like everyone sort of says, running is a good therapy because you sort of run along and work things out in your head. And then I got it in my head to see how many I could do.
It was a great focus for me away from a tough life, really. And to complete these races, you have to focus everything on getting to the start line and getting to the end because there are such challenging events. And it just gave me... My mind was great for me to think about passing the finish line rather than a tough life as such.
Tim Gardner, who's competing in the Everest Trail Race, also started ultra running after a difficult period in his life. Every athlete will have a different reason for endurance exercise. It's a very personal journey. For some, it's about a will that's generated by the enjoyable features of the journey, a sense of camaraderie with the pack, and for Tim, it's a way to de-stress, a way to cope.
It was mum passing from cancer and becoming a part-time dad in a short space of time. I felt I needed to do something for myself as well as others around me, so yeah.
Do you think when you initially started running ultras that you were running away from problems or running towards the answers?
I think at first it might have been a bit of running away, and then it soon turned into running towards answers, because it just makes me feel a lot more content with life now, so it is a lot better with running for sure.
It seems these ultra challenges have other benefits too, a form of therapy, a kind of healing. Dr. Greg Roebuck again.
We know that people after an ultramarathon have lower levels of anxiety than they do before the race. We don't really know at the moment why that's the case. It's possible that runners are sort of anxious about before the race about whether they'll complete it, and that anxiety has resolved by the time they finish the race. Interestingly, there's also some evidence that even when they're not running, ultramarathon runners have a mood profile that is superior to that of non-runners, with higher levels of energy and vigour and lower levels of negative mood states.
I'm now facing a 5 kilometre stretch. Well, actually, it's more like a slog. It's going to be hard, but I am determined to keep moving, to not give up. And I'll remind myself of the reasons why I do love running long distances. I'll keep reminding myself of that euphoric feeling, the endorphins, the adrenaline, the self-pride and confidence I'll get when I'll cross that finish line.
But could that high be dangerous? The elation that comes from reaching that fine line between pleasure and pain. I've heard ultra runners described as obsessive-compulsive, crazy. I run approximately 3,000 to 4,000 miles a year. However, I'd describe myself as an ordinary ultra runner. So why do people push past the reasonable limits of endurance? Is it a form of compulsion, an addiction even?
I worked with 255 ultra-endurance athletes. So those are people that are running marathon distance or further. They're doing things like Ironman triathlon, or they're swimming really long distances.
Dr. Josie Perry is a sports psychologist from the UK. She got athletes to answer a questionnaire to assess whether they were at risk of exercise addiction, asking how much exercise they did, how important it was to them, and how it impacted on their friends and family.
In the general population, exercise addiction levels are very low, 1-2%. As you go into more serious sports, they go up to about 20%. What was really interesting in this study was that when we're looking at ultra-endurance athletes, we found that the exercise addiction levels were around 44%, so really, really high there. The risk factors for exercise addiction in general definitely swayed towards endurance athletes and particularly runners. So other researchers have looked at why people get addicted to any type of exercise, and they found out that the longer somebody will be competing for is a big risk factor. The more training hours you need to do is a big risk factor. Interestingly, as you age, it's a risk factor. We have a lot more older endurance athletes, and people step up the distances as they get older. So there are reasons why runners are more likely to be addicted than people doing other sports.
Dr. Perry has allowed me to take the survey. Am I addicted or committed to the challenge? I've left my family back home for weeks to run in the Arctic, to race overseas. I sometimes put my son to bed, drive to the mountains 60 miles away to run home overnight so I can take my son to nursery, and often I get up at 4:30 in the morning to run 20 miles before breakfast. Is this enduring love, or am I addicted to the challenge? So, what's the verdict?
Moment of truth, Josie. I'm a bit nervous. I'm not lying. So what can you tell me? Am I an addict?
So you would need to sit down with a psychologist to actually get a diagnosis of exercise addiction. But what the exercise inventory does is look at whether you're at risk of it. And you weren't. And what was really clear is you weren't, because you don't let it impact extensively on other parts of your life. You incorporate it into your life, but it's not causing conflict. It's not upsetting other elements. It's not stopping you working in the way you want to or looking after children in the way that you want to. So actually it fits in well and you come across as a very diligent athlete.
Oh, well, that's a relief to hear that.
Endurance exercise can be addictive and brutal at the same time. For me, to take part entails suffering and hardship. I've often thought I can't possibly go any further, but the next step will prove me wrong. So why do we run so far? And why can some of us run through the pain barrier when others can't? For many, pushing the line between thrill and danger is exactly the point.
Ultra runners have to tolerate pain over very, very long periods of time. As you would know, it's not uncommon for races to take most of a day or even longer than 24 hours, and there can be multi-stage races that go on for many days. Pain is inevitable during the races, and somehow runners are able to put up with the pain and continue nonetheless.
Greg Roebuck did a simple test to see whether 20 ultra runners had a higher pain tolerance than the same number of non-endurance runners. He got them to plunge a hand into a bucket of ice and see whether they could keep it there for 3 minutes.
Basically, we found that the ultra runners had vastly higher pain tolerance than our control participants, who were matched to the ultra runners for age and gender. The ultra runners all kept their hand in the cold water for the full 3 minutes of the test, with the exception of 4 runners. And the average kind of immersion time for the ultra running group was very close to that 3 minutes. The average immersion time for the controls was more like 90 seconds. So the ultra runners kept their hands in for sort of double the time that the controls were able to. We also looked at whether there were any psychological factors that might explain ultra marathon runners' increased pain tolerance. And we found that they had much lower levels of pain-related anxiety than the controls. They didn't find the experience of pain as anxiety-provoking in the same way as the non-runners do.
What you've just said is very, very interesting, as I know I have dragged myself over a finish line in minus 72 degrees Celsius weather and 70 mile per hour winds with fractured feet. I've also been in a race where I had incredibly sore feet. I'd trench foot, I'd lost my toenails, they were swollen. However, over a period of about 10 hours, I'd convinced myself that it was all about putting one foot in front of another, and if I put one foot in front of another, it meant I was 1 foot closer to the finish line. And within those 10 hours of running, the pain disappeared. And I'm convinced to this day that was the moment when my mind took over, my body gave up. And I found this surge of energy deep within the soul that just carried me towards the finishing line with this huge smile on my face. Is it genetic? Is that just physical strength? Or is it down to psychology?
There are lots of amazing stories like the one you just told. It's probably partly genetic, so things like pain tolerance are to a significant extent genetic, but it's also probably partly environmental, so it's probably a mixture of the two. I think an expression that an ultra running maxim that I always remembered was that one that if the bone ain't showing, keep on going.
I've just had man flu since I've been here, so I felt quite ill and poorly, but I've had a little boy to deal with as well. But the race was amazing. I can't believe I came 7th man and 9th overall.
Tim Gardner is back home after finishing the Everest Trail Race. The problem with goals, I find, is that completing one is both rewarding and anticlimactic. The death of one goal often signals the birth of another, and that's the case for Tim. He's not even recovered from this event, and he's already planning his next challenge, an infamous race in North America called the Barkley Marathon, which is more extreme than any he has tried before.
It's 100 miles, 20-mile loops, 5 of them, and you climb Everest twice in that 100 miles. So it makes the up and downs horrendous, and you have 60 hours to complete. And it's been going for 30 years, and only 1% have completed it. So only 15 people have completed it in 30 years. So it's one of the toughest for sure, yeah.
So why do you want to do it with a failure rate so high?
I think that is why, because there is a high chance you will fail, and it's just, that is a challenge. And seeing if you are mentally strong enough to do something which is all set up for you to fail. That'll be my little baby as such. I'll be able to keep on trying to go at it until I feel like I can not give it any more.
For some, endurance sport helps regain a healthy balance between mind, body and soul. The long-time commitment of ultra running affords athletes the opportunity to think about what they're enduring and to experience some kind of spiritual experience. Dr. Greg Roebuck.
Another quite interesting motivation is the spiritual or transcendent mental states that can occur during races, particularly in some of the longer races. Runners talk about entering these very interesting, almost meditative or spiritual states where they feel a sort of oneness with the environment, or they feel distinctly different to how they feel when they're not doing an ultramarathon. There's at least one study that supports the idea that runners can even hallucinate during ultramarathons. So certainly they take runners to some pretty interesting mental places.
I can relate to that. I remember at the end of the Arctic race, I desperately wanted to sit down, and suddenly I saw a park bench on the ice road and thought, how kind of the organisers to put one there for me. And as I went to sit on this park bench, it suddenly disappeared and I fell straight on the floor.
That's really interesting, and it makes you wonder what's going on in the runners' brains, that they are experiencing these visual and other hallucinations. And another sort of related factor to that is there's some sort of limited evidence that people who engage in ultra running may be more prone to experience runner's high than others. They may get these euphoric feelings from exercise and other people don't.
My training run is about to come to an end, but like Tim and the other ultra runners, I'll always be looking for the next challenge.
Oh, I was determined not to stop at the end, and I kept telling myself, don't quit. I do it because I live for that challenge that breaks you down, basically, when you've got nothing left in the tank, and then you find a way to keep going. But now, a mother, I also do it for my son, because I think it's so important for us to have goals. Sometimes they don't all come true, but it's about not quitting. It's about facing the fears, facing the doubts, and coming out of it, the other side, stronger, and having that self-belief.
I'm Laurie Morgan, and this was The Why Factor. The producer was Paul Grant, and our editor was Gail Champion. If you've enjoyed this episode, you might like listening to our programmes on why do people take risks and competition on bbc.co.uk/Why Factor. And the reward for pushing your limits can make you feel more alive than ever before.
The mist has gone, the sunrise is coming up, we can see all the mountains. I'm trying to spot Everest. But this view, I'm telling you, is something else. So special to be here right now. So special.
A brutal murder.
Carter and Artis were found guilty of gunning down 3 people, triple murder in a bar.
A celebrity boxer.
He liked to fight, but he wasn't a violent person.
A controversial verdict.
We were convicted, said Carter, because we are black.
A box of cassette tapes that have never been heard before.
I knew that these people knew that I knew that they knew that I didn't commit this crime.
And maybe the answer to a case that's gone unsolved for over 50 years.
Well, the guy who did it, actually, I knew him.
What do you mean the guy who did it? Who's the guy who did it?
There was a guy in Patterson that confessed to doing it.
Really?
On his deathbed.
Right, you don't remember his name?
Yeah, I do, but I don't think I'm going to do that right now.
I'm Steve Crossman, and I've spent the last year tracking down everyone involved in the story of Reuben Hurricane Carter. The result is the Hurricane Tapes, a brand new podcast from the BBC World Service. The first 2 episodes will be released on January 14th.